Okay, sorry about that. I got myself tickled saying the Spanish. Okay, so um, here after the name is corrected, um, again we're still in chapter 7, and we're learning about the salamander army. Yeah. Um, that last sentence that was in Spanish. Aquí nosotros hablamos español, señor Granfidor. Here we speak Spanish, Mr. Super Stinky. I'm sorry. I got tickled. Okay. Anyways, so she's it's insulting, right? Like how could you not say the name right? Because here we speak Spanish, so deal with it. Okay. All right. You must be Bonso, then? Ender asked, pronouncing the name correctly. No, just a brilliant and talented polyglot, Petra Arcanian, the only girl in Salamander Army, with more cojones than anybody else in this room. Mother Petra, she talking, said one of the boys. She talking, she talking. And another one chimed in. She talking, she talking. Okay, quite a few laughed. Just between you and me, Petra said, if they gave the battle school an enema, they'd stick it in at green, green, brown. Okay, so an enema, if you guys are not familiar with that, is actually a medical treatment that goes in via the bottom, the rear end. So she's basically saying that their particular contingent is like the rear end, the butt of battle school. It's not great. Ender despaired. He already had nothing going for him. Grossly undertrained, small, inexperienced, doomed to be resented for early advancement. And now, by chance, he had made exactly the wrong friend. An outcast in Salamander Army, and she had just linked him with her in the minds of the rest of the army. A good day's work. For a moment, as Ender looked around at the laughing, jeering faces, he imagined their bodies covered with hair, their teeth pointed for tearing. Am I the only human being in this place? Are all the others animals waiting only to devour? Then he remembered a lie. In every army, surely there was at least one worth knowing. Suddenly, though no one said to be quiet, the laughter stopped and the group fell silent. Ender turned to the door. A boy stood there, tall and slender, with beautiful black eyes and slender lips that hinted at refinement. Okay, so he looks sort of upper class. Okay, I would follow such beauty, said something inside Ender. I would see as those eyes see. So he's already commanding a lot of respect. Okay, who are you? Asked the boy quietly. Ender Wiggin, sir, Ender said, reassigned from launch to Salamander Army. He held out the orders. The boy took the paper in a swift, sure movement without touching Ender's hand. How old are you, Wiggin? He asked. Almost 7. Still quietly, he said, I asked how old you are, not how old you almost are. I am 6 years, 9 months, and 12 days old. How long have you been working in the battle room? A few months now. My aim is better. Any training in battle maneuvers? Have you ever been part of a tune? Have you ever carried out a joint exercise? Ender had never heard of such things. He shook his head. Madrid looked at him steadily. I see. As you will quickly learn, the officers in command of this school, most notably Major Anderson, who runs the game, are fond of playing tricks. Salamander Army is just beginning to emerge from indecent obscurity. We have won 12 of our last 20 games. We have surprised Rat and Scorpion and Hound, and we are ready to play for leadership in the game. So, of course, I am given such a useless, untrained, hopeless specimen of underdevelopment as yourself. Petra said quietly, "He isn't glad to meet you." "Shut up, Arcanian," Madrid said. "To one trial, we now add another. But whatever obstacles our officers choose to fling in our path, we are still Salamander!" cried the soldiers in one voice. Instinctively, Ender's perception of these events changed. It was a pattern, a ritual. Madrid was not trying to hurt him, merely taking control of a surprising event and using it to strengthen his control of his army. "We are the fire that will consume them, belly and bowel, head and heart, many flames of us, but one fire. Salamander!" they cried again. "Even this one will not weaken us." For a moment, Ender allowed himself to hope. "I'll work hard and learn quickly," he said. "I didn't give you permission to speak," Madrid answered. "I intend to trade you away as quickly as I can. I'll probably have to give up someone valuable along with you, but as small as you are worse than useless. One more frozen, inevitably, in every battle. That's all you are. And we're now at a point where every frozen soldier makes a difference in the standings. Nothing personal, Wigan, but I'm sure you can get your training at someone else's expense." "He's all heart," Petra said. Madrid stepped closer to the girl and slapped her across the face with the back of his hand. It made little sound, for only his fingernails had hit her. But there were bright red marks, 4 of them, on her cheek, and little pricks of blood marked where the tips of his fingernails had struck. "Here are your instructions, Wigan. I expect that it is the last time I'll need to speak to you. You will stay out of the way when we're training in the battle room. You have to be there, of course, but you will not belong to any toon, and you will not take part in any maneuvers. When we're called to battle, you will dress quickly and present yourself at the gate with everyone else, but you will not pass through the gate until 4 full minutes after the beginning of the game, and then you will remain at the gate with your weapons undrawn and unfired until such time as the game ends." Ender nodded. So he was to be a nothing. He hoped the trade happened soon. He also noticed that Petra did not so much as cry out in pain or touch her cheek. The one spot of blood had beaded and run, making a streak down to her jaw. Outcast she may be, but since Bonso Madrid was not going to be Ender's friend, no matter what, he might as well make friends with Petra. He was assigned a bunk at the far end of the room, the upper bunk, so that when he lay on his bed, he couldn't even see the door. The curve of the ceiling blocked it. There were other boys near him, tired-looking boys, sullen, the boys least valued, or the ones least valued. They had nothing of welcome to say to Ender. Ender tried to palm his locker open, but nothing happened. Then he realized the lockers were not secured. All 4 of them had rings on them to pull them open. Nothing would be private then, now that he was in an army. There was a uniform in the locker, not the pale green of the launchies, but the orange-trimmed dark green of Salamander Army. It did not fit well. But then, they had probably never had to provide such a uniform for a boy so young. He was starting to take it off when he noticed Petra walking down the aisle toward his bed. He slid off the bunk and stood on the floor to greet her. "Relax," she said. "I'm not an officer." "You're a toon leader, aren't you?" Someone nearby snickered. "What gave you that idea, Wigan? You have a bunk in the front." "I bunk in the front because I'm the best sharpshooter in Salamander Army, and because Bonso is afraid I'll start a revolution if the toon leaders don't keep an eye on me. As if I could start anything with boys like these." She indicated the sullen-faced boys on the nearby bunks. What was she trying to do? Make it worse than it already was? Everybody's better than I am, Ender said, trying to dissociate himself from her contempt for the boys who would, after all, be his near bunkmates. I'm a girl, she said, and you're an eensy little 6-year-old. We have so much in common. Why don't we be friends? I won't do your desk work for you, he said. In a moment, she realized it was a joke. Ha! She said. It's all so military when you're in the game. School for us isn't like it is for launchies. History and strategy and tactics and buggers and math and stars, things you'll need as a pilot or a commander. You'll see. So you're my friend. Do I get a prize? Ender asked. He was imitating her swaggering way of speaking as if she cared about nothing. Bonso isn't going to let you practice. He's going to make you take your desk to the battle room and study. He's right, in a way. We don't want a totally untrained little kid to screw up his precision maneuvers. She lapsed into Jiria, the slangy talk that imitated the pidgin English of uneducated people. Also, he precise. He's so careful. He make no mess. He never splash. Ender grinned. When the battle room is open all the time. If you want, I'll take you in the off hours and show you some of the things I know. I'm not a great soldier, but I'm pretty good, and I sure know more than you. If you want, Ender said. Starting tomorrow morning after breakfast. What if somebody's using the room? We always went right after breakfast in my launch. No problem. There are really 9 battle rooms. I never heard of any others. They all have the same entrance. The whole center of the battle school, the hub of the wheel, is battle rooms. They don't rotate with the rest of the station. That's how they do the nullo, the no gravity. It just holds still. No spin, no down. But they can set it up so that any one of the rooms is at the battle room entrance corridor that we all use. Once you're inside, they move it along and another battle room's in position. Oh, like I said, right after breakfast. Right, Ender said. She started to walk away. Petra, he said. She turned back. Thanks. She said nothing, just turned around again and walked down the aisle. Ender climbed back up on his bunk and finished taking off his uniform. He lay naked on the bed, doodling with his new desk, trying to decide if they had done anything to his access codes. Sure enough, they had wiped out his security system. He couldn't own anything here, not even his desk. The lights dimmed a little, getting toward bedtime. Ender didn't know which bathroom to use. Go left out of the door, said the boy on the next bunk. We share it with Rat, Condor, and Squirrel. Ender thanked him and started to walk on past. Hey, said the boy, you can't go like that. Uniforms at all times, even out of this room. Even going to the toilet? Especially, and you're forbidden to speak to anyone from any other army, at meals or in the toilet. You can get away with it sometimes in the game room, and of course, whenever a teacher tells you to, but if Bonso catch you, you dead, huh? Thanks. And, Bonso get mad if you skinned by Petra. She was naked when I came in, wasn't she? She do what she liked, but you keep your clothes on. Bonso's orders. That was stupid. Petra still looked like a boy. It was a stupid rule. It set her apart, made her different, split the army. Stupid, stupid. How did Bonso get to be a commander if he didn't know any better than that? A lie would be a better commander than Bonso. He knew how to bring a group together. I know how to bring a group together too, thought Ender. Maybe I'll be commander someday. In the bathroom, he was washing his hands when somebody spoke to him. Hey, they putting babies in salamander uniforms now? Ender didn't answer, just dried off his hands. Hey, look, Salamander's getting babies now. Look at this. He could walk through my legs without even touching me. Yeah, sure he would, Tink. Somebody answered. Weird. As Ender left the room, he heard somebody else say, "It's Wiggin. You know, the smart aleck Launchy from the game room." He walked down the corridor smiling. He may be short, but they know his name. They knew his name. From the game room, of course, so it meant nothing. But they'd see. He'd be a good soldier, too. They'd all know his name soon enough. Not in Salamander Army, maybe, but soon enough. Petra was waiting in the corridor that led to the battle room. "Wait a minute," she said to Ender. "Rabbit Army just went in and it takes a few minutes to change to the next battle room." Ender sat down beside her. "There's more to the battle room than just switching from one to the next." Okay, yeah, that was right. Sorry. "There's more to the battle room than just switching from one to the next," he said. "For instance, why is there gravity in the corridor outside the room just before we go in?" Petra closed her eyes. "And if the battle rooms are really free floating, what happens when one is connected? Why doesn't it start to move with the rotation of the school?" Ender nodded. "These are the mysteries," Petra said in a deep whisper. "Do not pry into them. Terrible things terrible things happened to the last soldier who tried. He was discovered hanging by his feet from the ceiling of the bathroom with his head stuffed in the toilet." Of course she was joking, but the message was clear. So I'm not the first person to ask the question. You remember this, little boy. When she said little boy, it sounded friendly, not contemptuous. They never tell you any more truth than they have to. But any kid with brains knows, oh, sorry, any kid with brains knows that there have been some changes in science since the days of old Mazer Rackham and the victorious fleet. Obviously, we can now control gravity, turn it on and off, change the direction, maybe reflect it. I've thought of lots of neat things you could do with gravity weapons and gravity drives on starships. And think how starships could move near planets, maybe tear big chunks out of them by reflecting the planet's own gravity back on itself, only from another direction, and focus down to a smaller point. But they say nothing. Ender understood more than she said. Manipulation of gravity was one thing, deception by the officers was another, but the most important message was this: the adults are the enemy, not the other armies. They do not tell us the truth. "Come, little boy," she said, "the battle room is ready. Petra's hands are steady, the enemy is deadly." She giggled. "Petra the poet, they call me. They also say you're crazy as a loon." "Better believe it, baby butt." She had 10 target balls in a bag. Ender held on to her suit with one hand and the wall with the other to steady her as she threw them, hard, in different directions. In the null gravity, they bounced every which way. "Let go of me," she said. She shoved off, spinning deliberately. With a few deft hand moves, she steadied herself and began aiming carefully at ball after ball. When she shot one, its glow changed from white to red. Ender knew that the color change lasted less than 2 minutes. Only one ball had changed back to white when she got the last one. She rebounded accurately from a wall and came at high speed back to Ender. He caught her and held her against her own rebound, one of the first techniques they had taught him as a Launchy. "You're good," he said. "None better, and you're going to learn how to do it." Petra taught him to hold his arm straight, to aim with the whole arm. Something most soldiers don't realize is that the farther away your target is, the longer you have to hold the beam within about a 2 centimeter circle. It's the difference between a tenth of a second and half a second. But in battle, that's a long time. A lot of soldiers think they missed when they were right on target, but they moved away too fast. So you can't use your gun like a sword, swish, swish, slice them in half. You've got to aim. She used the ball collar to bring the targets back, then launched them slowly, one by one. Ender fired at them. He missed every one. "Good," she said. "You don't have any bad habits." I don't have any good ones either, he pointed out. I give you those. They didn't accomplish much that first morning, mostly talk, how to think while you were aiming. You've got to hold your own motion and your enemy's motion in your mind at the same time. You've got to hold your arm straight out and aim with your body, so in case your arm is frozen, you can still shoot. Learn where your trigger actually fires and ride the edge so you don't have to pull so far each time you fire. Relax your body. Don't tense up. It makes you tremble. It was the only practice Ender got that day. During the Army's drills in the afternoon, Ender was ordered to bring his desk and do his schoolwork, sitting in a corner of the room. Bonso had to bring all his soldiers to the battle room, but he didn't have to use them. Ender did not do his schoolwork, however. If he couldn't drill as a soldier, he would study Bonso as a tactician. Salamander Army was divided into the standard 4 toons of 10 soldiers each. Some commanders set up their toons so that A toon consisted of the best soldiers and D toon had the worst. Bonso had mixed them so that each consisted of good soldiers and weaker ones. Except that B toon only had 9 boys. Had only 9 boys. Ender wondered who had been transferred to make room for him. It soon became plain that the leader of Toon B was new. No wonder Bonso was so disgusted. He had lost a toon leader to get Ender. And Bonso was right about another thing. Ender was not ready. All the practice time was spent working on maneuvers. Toons that couldn't see each other practiced performing precision operations together with exact timing. Toons practiced using each other to make sudden changes of direction without losing formation. All these soldiers took for granted skills that Ender didn't have. The ability to make a soft landing and absorb most of the shock, accurate flight, course adjustment using the frozen soldiers floating randomly through the room, rolls, spins, dodges, sliding along the walls. Excuse me, sliding along the walls. A very difficult maneuver, and yet one of the most valuable since the enemy couldn't get behind you. Even as Ender learned how much he did not know, he also saw things that he could improve on. The well-rehearsed formations were a mistake. It allowed the soldiers to obey shouted orders instantly, but it also meant they were predictable. Also, the individual soldiers were given little initiative. Once a pattern was set, they were to follow it through. There was no room for adjustment to what the enemy did against. There was no room for adjustment to what the enemy did against the formation. Sorry, got lost. Ender studied Bonso's formations like an enemy commander would, noting ways to disrupt the formation. During free play that night, Ender asked Petra to practice with him. No, she said, I want to be a commander someday, so I've got to play the game room. It was a common belief that the teachers monitored the games and spotted potential commanders there. Ender doubted it, though. Toon leaders had a better chance to show what they might do as commanders than any video player. But he didn't argue with Petra. The after breakfast practice was generous enough. Still, he had to practice. And he couldn't practice alone, except a few of the basic skills. Most of the hard things required partners or teams. If only he still had a Lai or Shen to practice with. Well, why shouldn't he practice with them? He had never heard of a soldier practicing with launchies, but there was no rule against it. It just wasn't done. Launchies were held in too much contempt. Well, Ender was still being treated like a launchie anyway. He needed someone to practice with, and in return, he could help them learn from some of the he could help them learn some of the things he saw the older boys doing. Hey, the great soldier returns, said Bernard. Ender stood in the doorway of his old barracks. He'd only been away for a day, but it seemed like an alien place, and the others of his launch group were strangers. Almost he turned around and left. But there was a Lai who had made their friendship sacred. A Lai was not a stranger. Ender made no effort to conceal how he was treated in Salamander Army. And they're right. I'm about as useful as a sneeze in a jumpsuit. Alai laughed, and other launchies started to gather around. Ender proposed his bargain. Free play every day, working hard in the battle room under Ender's direction. They would learn things from the armies, from the battles Ender would see. He would get the practice he needed in developing soldier skills. We'll get ready together. A lot of boys wanted to come too. Sure, Ender said, if you're coming to work. If you're just farting around, you're out. I don't have any time to waste. They didn't waste any time. Ender was clumsy, trying to describe what he had seen, working out ways to do it. But by the time free play ended, they had learned some things. They were tired, but they were getting the knack of a few techniques. Where were you? Said Bonso. Ender stood stiffly by his commander's bunk, practicing in a battle room. I hear you had some of your old launching group with you. I couldn't practice alone. I won't have any soldiers in Salamander Army hanging around with launchies. You're a soldier now. Ender regarded him in silence. Did you hear me, Wiggin? Yes, sir. No more practicing with those little farts. May I speak to you privately? Asked Ender. It was a request that commanders were required to allow. Bonsel's face went angry, and he led Ender out into the corridor. Listen, Wiggin, I don't want you. Okay, no. Listen, Wiggin, I don't want you. I'm trying to get rid of you, but don't give me any problems or I'll paste you to a wall. A good commander, thought Ender, doesn't have to make stupid threats. Bonso grew annoyed at Ender's silence. Look, you asked me to come out here, now talk. Sir, you were correct not to place me in a tune. I don't know how to do anything. I don't need you to tell me when I'm correct. But I'm going to become a good soldier. I won't screw up your regular drill, but I'm going to practice, and I'm going to practice with the only people who will practice with me, and that's my launchies. You'll do what I tell you, you little jerk. That's right, sir. I'll follow all the orders that you're authorized to give. But free play is free. No assignments can be given, none, by anyone. He could see Bonso's anger growing hot. Hot anger was bad. Ender's anger was cold, and he could use it. Bonso's was hot, and so it used him. Sir, I've got my own training. No, I've got my own career to think of. I won't interfere in your training and your battles, but I've got to learn sometime. I didn't ask to be put into your army. You're trying to trade me as soon as you can, but nobody will take me if I don't know anything, will they? Let me learn something, and then you can get rid of me all the sooner and get a soldier you can really use. Long chapter. Holy smokes. All right. Bonso was not such a fool that anger kept him from recognizing good sense when he heard it. Still, he couldn't let go of his anger immediately. While you're in Salamander Army, you'll obey me. If you try to control my free play, I can get you iced. It probably wasn't true, but it was possible. Certainly, if Ender made a fuss about it, interfering with free play could conceivably get Bonso removed from command. Also, there was the fact that the officers obviously saw something in Ender since they had promoted him. Maybe Ender did have influence enough with the teachers to ice somebody. Jerk, said Bonzo. It isn't my fault you gave me that order in front of everybody. Ender said, but if you want, I'll pretend you won this argument. Then tomorrow you can tell me you changed your mind. I don't need you to tell me what to do. I don't want the other guys to think you back down. You wouldn't be able to command as well. Bonzo hated him for it, for the kindness. Ender tried to understand why. Maybe it seemed to Bonzo as if Ender were granting him his command as a favor. Galling, and yet he had no choice. No choice about anything. Well, it was Bonzo's own fault for giving Ender an unreasonable order. Still, he would care only for no, he would care only that Ender had beaten him, and then rubbed his nose in it by rubbed his nose in it by being magnanimous. I'll beat you someday, Bonzo said. Probably, said Ender. The lights out buzzer sounded. Ender walked back into the room, looking dejected, beaten, angry. The other boys drew the obvious conclusion. And in the morning, as Ender was leaving for breakfast, Bonzo stopped him and spoke loudly. I changed my mind, Pinprick. Maybe by practicing with your launchies you'll learn something, and I can trade you easier. Anything to get rid of you faster. Thank you, sir, Ender said. Anything, whispered Bonzo. I hope you're iced. Ender smiled gratefully and left the room. After breakfast, he practiced again with Petra. All afternoon, he watched Bonzo drill and figured out ways to destroy his army. During free play, he and Eli and some of the others worked themselves to exhaustion. I can do this, thought Ender, as he lay. I can do this, thought Ender, as he lay in his bed, his muscles throbbing, unknotting themselves. I can handle it. Salamander Army had a battle 4 days later. Ender followed behind the real soldiers as they jogged along the corridors to the battle room. There were 2 ribbons along the walls, the green-green-brown of Salamander and the black-white-black of Condor. When they came to the place where the battle room had always been, the corridor split instead, with green-green-brown leading to the left and black-white-black to the right. Around another turn to the right, and the army stopped in front of a blank wall. The tunes formed up in silence. Ender stayed behind them all. Bonzo was giving his instructions. A. Take the handles and go up. B. Left. C. Right. D. Down. He saw that the tunes were oriented to follow instructions, then added, and you, Pinprick, wait 4 minutes and then come in just inside the door. Don't even take your gun off your suit. Ender nodded. Suddenly the wall behind Bonzo became transparent. Not a wall at all, then, but a force field. The battle room was different, too. Huge brown boxes were suspended in mid-air, partially obstructing the view. So these were the obstacles that the soldiers called stars. They were distributed seemingly at random. Bonzo seemed not to care where they were. Apparently, the soldiers already knew how to handle the stars. But it soon became clear to Ender, as he sat and watched the battle from the corridor, that they did not know how to handle the stars. They did know how to soft land on one and use it for cover. The tactics of assaulting the enemy's position on a star. They showed no sense at all of which stars mattered. They persisted in assaulting stars that could have been bypassed by wall sliding to a more advanced position. The other commander was taking advantage of Bonzo's neglected strategy. Condor Army forced the Salamanders into costly assaults. Fewer and fewer Salamanders were unfrozen for the attack on the next star. It was clear after only 4 minutes that Salamander Army could not defeat the enemy by attacking. Ender stepped through the gate. He drifted slightly downward. The battle rooms he had practiced in always had their doors at floor level. For real battles, however, the door was set in the middle of the wall, as far from the floor as from the ceiling. Abruptly, he felt himself reorient, as he had in the shuttle. What had been down was now up, and now sideways. In Nolo, there was no reason to stay oriented the way he had been in the corridor. It was impossible to tell, looking at the perfectly square doors, which way had been up. And it didn't matter. For now, Ender had found the orientation that made sense. The enemy's gate was down. The object of the game was to fall towards the enemy's house. Ender made the motions that oriented himself in his new direction. Instead of being spread out, his whole body presented to the enemy, now Ender's legs pointed toward them. He was a much smaller target. So he's like lying, if he's falling down towards the door, he's like arms and legs all, squished together. So he's a very skinny, narrow target as opposed to just like, a big spread out target. Someone saw him. He was, after all, drifting aimlessly in the open. Instinctively, he pulled his legs up under him. At that moment, he was flashed, and the legs of his suit froze in position. His arms remained unfrozen, for without a direct body hit, only the limbs that were shot froze up. It occurred to Ender that if he had not been presenting his legs to the enemy, it would have been his body they hit. He would have been immobilized. Since Balso had ordered him not to draw his weapon, Ender continued to drift, not moving his head or arms, as if they had been frozen too. The enemy ignored him and concentrated their fire on the soldiers who were firing at them. It was a bitter battle. Outnumbered now, Salamander army gave ground stubbornly. The battle disintegrated into a dozen individual shootouts. Balso's discipline paid off now, for each salamander that froze took at least one enemy with him. No one ran or panicked. Everyone remained calm and aimed carefully. Petra was especially deadly. Condor army noticed it and took great effort to freeze her. They froze her shooting arm first, and her stream of curses was only interrupted when they froze her completely and the helmet clamped down on her jaw. In a few minutes, it was over. Salamander army offered no more resistance. Ender noted with pleasure that Condor could only muster the minimal 5 soldiers necessary to open the gate to victory. 4 of them touched their helmets to the lighted spots at the 4 corners of Salamander's door, while the 5th passed through the force field. That ended the game. The lights came back on to their full brightness, and Anderson came out of the teacher door. I could have drawn my gun, thought Ender as the enemy approached the door. I could have drawn my gun and shot just one of them, and they would have been too few. The game would have been a draw. Without 4 men to touch the 4 corners and a 5th man to pass through the gate, Condor would have had no victory. Balso, you dummy, I could have saved you from this defeat, maybe even turned it to victory, since they were sitting there, easy targets, and they wouldn't have known at first where the shots were coming from. I'm a good enough shot for that. But orders were orders, and Ender had promised to obey. He did get some satisfaction out of the fact that on the official tally Salamander Army recorded not the expected 41 disabled or eliminated, but rather 40 eliminated and 1 damaged. Balso couldn't understand it until he consulted Anderson's book and realized who it was. I was only damaged, Balso, thought Ender. I could still shoot. He expected Balso to come to him and say, next time when it's like that, you can shoot. But Balso didn't say anything to him at all until the next morning after breakfast. Of course, Balso ate in the commander's mess, but Ender was pretty sure the odd score would cause as much stir there as it did in the soldiers' dining hall. In every other game that wasn't a draw, every member of the losing team was either eliminated, totally frozen, or disabled, which meant they had some body parts still unfrozen but were unable to shoot or inflict damage on the enemy. Salamander was the only losing army with 1 man in the damaged but active category. Ender volunteered no explanation, but the other members of Salamander Army let it be known why it had happened. And when other boys asked him why he hadn't disobeyed orders and fired, he calmly answered, I obey orders. After breakfast, Balzo looked for him. "The order still stands," he said, "and don't you forget it." "It will cost you, you fool. I may not be a good soldier, but I can still help, and there's no reason you shouldn't let me." But Ender said nothing. An interesting side effect of the battle was that Ender emerged at the top of the soldier efficiency list. Since he hadn't fired a shot, he had a perfect record on shooting. No misses at all. And since he had never been eliminated or disabled, his percentage there was excellent. No one else came close. It made a lot of boys laugh, and others were angry, but on the prize efficiency list, Ender was now the leader. He kept sitting out the army practice sessions and kept working hard on his own, with Petra in the mornings and his friends at night. More launchies were joining them now, not on a lark, but because they could see results. They were getting better and better. Ender and Ally stayed ahead of them, though. In part, it was because Ally kept trying new things, which forced Ender to think of new tactics to cope with them. In part, it was because they kept making stupid mistakes, which suggested things to do that no self-respecting, well-trained officer would even have tried. Many of the things they attempted turned out to be useless, but it was always fun, always exciting, and enough things worked that they knew it was helping them. Evening was the best time of day. The next two battles were easy salamander victories. Ender came in after 4 minutes and remained untouched by the defeated enemy. Ender began to realize that Condor Army, which had beaten them, was unusually good. Salamander, weak as Balzo's grasp of strategy might be, was one of the better teams, climbing steadily in the ratings, clawing for fourth place with Rat Army. Ender turned 7. They weren't much for dates and calendars at the battle school, but Ender had found out how to bring up the date on his desk, and he noticed his birthday. The school noticed it too. They took his measurements and issued him a new salamander uniform and a new flash suit for the battle room. He went back to the barracks with the new clothing on. It felt strange and loose, like his skin no longer fit properly. Words are hard, I'm sorry. He wanted to stop at Petra's bunk and tell her about his home, about what his birthdays were usually like. Just tell her it was his birthday so she'd say something about it being a happy one. But nobody told birthdays. It was childish. It was what landsiders did. Cakes and silly customs. Valentine baked him his cake on his 6th birthday. It fell, and it was terrible. Nobody knew how to cook anymore. It was the kind of crazy thing Valentine would do. Everybody teased Valentine about it, but Ender saved a little bit of it in his cupboard. Then they took out his monitor, and he left, and for all he knew, it was still there, a little piece of greasy yellow dust. Nobody talked about home, not among the soldiers. There had been no life before battle school. Nobody got letters, and nobody wrote any. Everybody pretended that they didn't care. But I do care, thought Ender. The only reason I'm here is so that a bugger won't shoot out Valentine's eye, won't blast her head open like the soldiers in the videos of the first battles with the buggers, won't split her head with a beam so hot that her brains burst the skull and spill out like rising bread dough, the way it happens in my worst nightmares, in my worst nights when I wake up trembling but silent, must keep silent, or they'll hear that I miss my family. I want to go home. It was better in the morning. Home was merely a dull ache in the back of his memory, tiredness in his eyes. That morning, Balso came in as they were dressing. "Flash suits," he called. It was a battle. Ender's 4th game. The enemy was Leopard Army. It would be easy. Leopard was new, and it was always in the bottom quarter in the standings. It had been organized only 6 months ago, with Paul Slattery as its commander. Paul Slattery as its commander. Ender put on his new battle suit and got into line. Balzo pulled him roughly out of line and made him march at the end. "You didn't need to do that," Ender said silently. "You could have let me stay in line." Ender watched from the corridor. Pole Slattery was young, but he was sharp. He had some new ideas. He kept his soldiers moving, darting from star to star, wall sliding to get behind and above the stolid salamanders. Ender smiled. Bonso was hopelessly confused, and so were his men. Leopard seemed to have men in every direction. However, the battle was not as lopsided as it seemed. Ender noticed that Leopard was losing a lot of men too. Their reckless tactics exposed them too much. What mattered, however, was that Salamander felt defeated. They had surrendered the initiative completely. Though they still were though they were still fairly evenly matched with the enemy, they huddled together like the last survivors of a massacre, as if they hoped the enemy would overlook them in the carnage. Ender slipped slowly through the gate, oriented himself so the enemy's gate was down, and drifted slowly eastward to a corner where he wouldn't be noticed. He even fired at his own legs to hold them and the kneeling position that offered him the best protection. He looked to any casual glance like another frozen soldier who had drifted helplessly out of the battle. With Salamander army waiting abjectly for destruction, Leopard obligingly destroyed them. When Salamander finally stopped firing, Leopard had 9 boys left. They formed up and started to open the Salamander gate. Ender aimed carefully with a straight arm, as Petra had taught him. Before anyone knew what was happening, he froze 3 of the soldiers who were about to press their helmets against the lighted corners of the door. Then some of the others spotted him and fired, but at first they hit only his already frozen legs. It gave him time to get the last 2 men at the gate. Leopard had only 4 men left frozen when Ender was finally hit in the arm and disabled. The game was a draw, and they never had hit him in the body. Pole Slattery was furious, but there had been nothing unfair about it. Everyone in Leopard Army assumed that it had been a strategy of Bonso's to leave a man till the last minute. It didn't occur to them that little Ender had fired against orders. Salamander Army knew. Bonso knew, and Ender could see from the way his commander looked at him that Bonso hated him for rescuing him from total defeat. I don't care, Ender told himself. It will just make me easier to trade away, and in the meantime, you won't drop so far in the standings. Just trade me. I've learned all I'm ever going to learn from you. How to fail with style, that's all you know, Bonso. What have I learned so far? Ender listed many things in his head as he undressed by his bunk. The enemy's gate is down. Use my legs as a shield in battle. A small reserve held back until the end of the game can be decisive. And soldiers can sometimes make decisions that are smarter than the orders they've been given. Naked, he was about to climb into bed when Balso came toward him, his face hard and set. I have seen Peter like this, thought Ender, silent, with murder in his eye. But Balso is not Peter. Balso has more fear. Wigan, I finally traded you. I was able to persuade Rat Army that your incredible place on the efficiency list is more than an accident. You go over there tomorrow. Thank you, sir, Ender said. Perhaps he sounded too grateful. Suddenly, Bonso swung at him, caught his jaw with a vicious, open-handed slap. It knocked Ender sideways into his bunk, and he almost fell. Then Bonso slugged him hard in the stomach. Ender dropped to his knees. You disobeyed me, Bonso said, loudly for all to hear. No good soldier ever disobeys. Even as he cried from the pain, Ender could not help but take vengeful pleasure in the murmurs he heard rising through the barracks. You fool, Bonso. You aren't enforcing discipline, you're destroying it. They know I turned defeat into a draw, and now they see how you repay me. You made yourself look stupid in front of everyone. What is your discipline worth now? The next day, Ender told Petra that for her sake, shooting practice in the morning would have to end. Balso didn't need anything that looked like a challenge now, so she'd better stay clear of Ender for a while. She understood perfectly. Besides, she said, you're as close to being a good shot as you'll ever be. He left his desk and flash suit in the locker. He would wear his salamander uniform until he could get to the commissary and change it for the brown and black of Rat. He had brought no possessions with him. He would take none away. There were none to have. Everything of value was in the school computer or his own head and hands. He used one of the public desks in the game room to register for an Earth Gravity personal combat course during the hour immediately after breakfast. He didn't plan to get vengeance on Balso for hitting him, but he did intend that no one would be able to do that to him again.